Welcome back, champions. We're here for the second matchup of Season 2 Siege of Winterfell. RRH was paired with LxR in a pretty even matchup. Both teams fielded, 56-57, can't get much more even than that. Power rankings, we had it on them by a little, couple of million, but not a great deal. Both teams opted for the two-way split, and Armory was probably stacked for both of us. The intense fighting in the beginning really shows how nice it is having that even matchup. Neither side could get too much of an advantage, so the battle wages on here for quite a while, but as you see, it does eventually go in our favour. I think fighting from within the circle really helps in these situations. We had about even numbers, but we had more in the circle, so we got that dominance. And once that's secured, the boost is on your side, so it helps to finish off or to push off the rest. It's something to be really aware of, and something that I remind my guys of, like every game. Fight from within the circle wherever possible, and it's always going to help. Even if you can't secure it indefinitely, having an outpost even is putting on points while you've got control of it. So from the armory, we moved on to the southwest outpost, and from here we were basically aiming to head to Winterfell, trying to get the outpost along the way, and meet up with some guys that were already there. LxR had taken control of the WF area fairly early, and probably too early. The respawn, or the resource doesn't spawn until 13 minutes or so in, I think it is. So if you're hanging around in WF in that time, really you're not being useful to your team elsewhere, and that's something else I try to be aware of. We're not perfect by no means. We've got more wins on the board than losses, but we still get schooled quite often. So it's, picking up on those things and trying to keep them in mind each match and improve on the last performance. So LxR, after being beaten on both the Armory and Hot Spring side, regrouped and headed straight for WF in force. They basically eradicated any troops we had to the south side, but we had our reinforcements coming in from the north as well. So it became then a fight for the WF area, control of it, and then the control of the resource subsequently. We were outnumbered even by this point, and they get a good counterattack happening. So they secured objectives all over the place. I was sort of moving around trying to take advantage of the fact that they did group up. So while they were grouped and on other resources, I tried to sneak a couple of, which I did manage to do. And as said, all the points help and they all add up. But once again, we head back to WF, both sides in force, probably more numbers on the LxR side, and it made for a really interesting fight here, because it was basically the bulk of both forces in sort of a early decisive battle. You can classify different fights at different times as to whether they're really important or not, and I think this match had some really good examples of important battles, and this is one of them. Whoever won this fight was effectively going to have control of WF and the resource, and it was going to allow them to put some more points on the board. Now, while we did have 5,000 on them at this stage, if they'd managed another resource here, we really would have just been back to evens pegs and going at it right from the start again. And at this stage, they already had control of the objectives. So going back to even would have put us in a bad spot. The deadlock continued though. As said, they had a few more numbers on us, but we seemed to be getting, pushed back, but not at an altogether fast rate. They weren't clearing us out completely, and a lot of that was that we were moving back to make sure that we had control of the respawn points. If they pushed forward at all, we tried to make sure that their forerunners went down before pushing back again. So as you can see, the WF area is clear and it allows TARDIS to pick up the resource. She heads straight north, doesn't muck around whatsoever, and that's another important point. When you're in a situation like this and the fighting is fierce around WF, you need to get that resource and get out of there and just trust that your running blocks are going to do their job and keep the enemy off you. So TARDIS keeps moving, and we fight this sort of staggered retreat, which is an old school military technique, and it's something that's really useful in Siege of Winterfell if it's done correctly. There's sort of like an odd balance between, if you run away while you're being attacked by a certain number of forces, eventually you're just going to die from those attacks without achieving any objective. Whereas if you sort of stagger your retreat and do a bit of fighting and then pull back a bit and do a bit of fighting, obviously you need the stats and you need your forces there to do so. If you're overwhelmed completely, it's not going to work. But if a team of people do that together, then they can really delay the troop movements, and that's what you're seeing here. So the staggered retreat has effectively held them just north of Winterfell, even by this stage, with the resource sort of halfway to its objective. Anyone that tries to get past, we pull back a bit further and try and hit on them. So it moves north gradually, but not at such a rate that they're going to catch TARDIS and the resource. One thing that LxR did very well during this match is they tried to control the objectives if they couldn't control the resource. So while this first one we got pretty easily, you'll see later in the match that we actually had to make some quick decisions on where we were headed based on their troop movements, because they were sneaking up the left, or the west and east side of the map, and really trying to put pressure on our side resources. So TARDIS locks it in. They haven't made it out of the northern section, but they have got control of the WF area. So LxR, by this stage, is sort of just cleaning us up. The staggered retreat did cost us, and it meant that we had to regroup in the north again. Once we regrouped, we could push back and try and retake control. They still had the armory, and at this stage we were fighting for the hot springs as well. But with 8,000 points, nearly 9,000 by this stage on them, it was sort of stretching out, even though they had about equal points from buildings at that stage. We ended up securing the WF area again. We pushed them off. I jumped ahead a little bit here because this is really the decisive moment for the match. We had to fight them once again in mass and try and secure another resource. Now, we had the points from buildings while all of them were still being contested, nearly all of them were still being contested. We're getting 840 to their 440, we've got the lead, but it's not by a great deal. So one more resource, considering its scales, was still a dangerous thing for us. So once again, we tried to keep the area for the spawn clear and managed to do so, picking up the resource and heading north once again. But before we did that, and before we could do that, we were waiting on the armory to become secured so that we could take that buff and sort of counter-attack with the best outcomes. So here, while it looks like we're sort of playing around a bit and not engaging fully, it's for good reason. Once that armory becomes secured, and it is about at this stage that it does, then we start pushing a lot harder and going at them, to try and get it done. So once we've got that resource, which we pick up here, we head north again. The plan was to go northwest, and as we were moving to do so, they once again did the smart play of sneaking up the sides. So I think we readjust here at a certain point and start heading northeast. TARDIS is our CK, so she's quite capable of making those decisions herself, but it's something you should be aware of. Keeping communication up and letting everybody know where you're at is always a good thing. So here you can see what I'm talking about. They got up, all the way to the northeast. They were already pretty well in control of the northwest at this stage, and they just didn't quite have enough to lock it in. So we got the resource there and put the final nail in the coffin. Cheers for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed, and catch you next time.